They say the best revenge is living well. That is a lie told by people too afraid to strike a match. The best revenge is structural. You find the load-bearing wall in their perfectly constructed life. You take a sledgehammer and you wait. Richard thought I was just the decoration in his lobby. He forgot that I was the one who drew the blueprints. The machine let out a harsh, dissonant beep that cut through the low hum of the coffee shop conversations. It was a sound I knew, but usually from the other side of the counter, when a customer fumbled a PIN code. "I'm sorry, it was declined," the barista said. She was young, maybe 20, with a small silver hoop in her nose and pity in her eyes. I hated the pity more than the noise. "Try it again," I said. My voice was steady, calm, the voice of a woman who wore Italian silk and never checked price tags. "The chip is sensitive." She pushed the card back into the reader. The silence stretched. I could smell the roasted beans, the sanitizer, and the faint, cloying scent of vanilla syrup. I watched her fingers tap the screen. Beep. "It says, 'Do not honor,'" she whispered, leaning in as if sharing a secret. "Do you have another form of payment?" I looked at the sleek black card in the machine. Richard's primary account. The one with a limit that could buy this entire building. My chest tightened, a cold pressure expanding behind my ribs. It wasn't an error. Richard didn't make errors. He made maneuvers. "No," I said, sliding the card back into my wallet. I changed my mind. I turned and walked out, my heels clicking a sharp rhythm on the tile. I didn't run. I kept my chin high, sensing the eyes on my back. The morning air outside was crisp, smelling of exhaust and damp pavement. I made it to my car, a silver sedan that Richard always called sensible, and shut the door. The silence inside was absolute. I pulled my phone from my purse. No service. A little X where the signal bars should be. He'd cut me off. He'd severed the digital arteries of my life in the time it took me to drive 3 miles for a latte. I reached for the glove compartment to find the emergency cash I kept tucked inside the manual. My fingers brushed against thick, heavy paper, not cash. I pulled it out. A manila envelope sealed with red wax tape. My name was scrawled on the front in Richard's jagged, aggressive handwriting. I ripped it open. Inside wasn't money. It was a stack of legal documents. At the top, a dissolution of marriage petition. Beneath that, stapled with brutal efficiency, was a foreclosure notice for a property I didn't know I owned. If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. The memory of this morning's meeting with Richard finally sharpened, cutting through the fog of shock. I had blocked it out the way a body blocks out the pain of a break until the adrenaline fades. I sat in my car staring at the legal papers, but I was back in his office. The room had smelled of leather and expensive scotch, even at 9 in the morning. Richard sat behind his mahogany desk, a fortress of his own making. He didn't look up when I entered. He was signing papers, the scratching of his fountain pen the only sound in the cavernous room. "Sit down, Monica," he had said, finally capping the pen. "I don't want to sit, Richard. Why are the accounts frozen?" He leaned back, steepling his fingers. It was his negotiation pose. "Because assets are frozen during litigation. You know this." "Litigation?" "We're done," he said. No emotion, just a statement of fact, like commenting on the weather. I need someone who fits the trajectory of the firm, someone with pedigree. You've been a wonderful companion, but let's be honest. You're a drafter, Monica. You're good at coloring inside the lines I draw. You're nothing special. The words had landed like physical blows. Nothing special. The nights I spent correcting his risk assessments, the tax loopholes I found that saved him $3 million last year. "I built half this firm," I whispered. "You supported me while I built it." He corrected. He slid a thick folder across the desk. "I'm not leaving you with nothing. I'm generous. I'm transferring the deed to the Gilded Cage to your name. Sole ownership." The Gilded Cage. The boutique hotel project downtown. He had bought it 2 years ago, intending to renovate it into the crown jewel of the city. "It's a money pit," I said. Construction stopped 6 months ago. It's an asset, he smiled, a shark showing teeth. If you're as smart as you think you are, you'll make it work. If not, well, you can always go back to teaching algebra. Back in the car, I looked at the foreclosure notice in my lap. The bank was threatening to seize the property in 30 days for non-payment of the mortgage. He hadn't given me an asset. He'd given me an anchor. I picked up my phone, remembering the disconnected service, and threw it onto the passenger seat. I started the car and drove. I had to see it. I had to see what my settlement actually looked like. I parked in front of the hotel. It was a 12-story Art Deco tower that had once been beautiful. Now, the limestone was streaked with grime, and the neon sign flickered even in the daylight. I pushed through the revolving doors. The lobby was empty. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light, cutting through the heavy velvet drapes. A young man in a fraying uniform stood behind the marble reception desk, playing a game on his phone. "Checking in?" he asked, not looking up. "I own the place," I said. He dropped the phone. "You're the new owner. Mr. Sterling said someone was coming." "Where is the manager?" "Mr. Arthur is in the back." I walked around the desk, my heels sinking into the carpet that hadn't been vacuumed in weeks. I found the office door ajar. Inside, a gray-haired man was staring at a computer screen, his head in his hands. "Arthur?" He jumped, spinning around. "Who are you?" "Monica Sterling, Richard's wife, ex-wife." Arthur let out a long, ragged sigh. He looked exhausted. "Mrs. Sterling, I hope you brought a checkbook. Why?" "Because the staff walked out an hour ago," Arthur said, pointing to the screen. "Payroll bounced, again, and the catering company just called. They're suing us for the unpaid balance on the last 3 events." I stared at the accounts on Arthur's screen. It was a sea of red. Negative balances, overdraft fees, interest penalties. It wasn't just mismanagement, it was a massacre. Richard hadn't just stopped funding the project, he had actively drained it. "How much do we owe?" I asked. "Operations?" $200,000. To the bank? $4.5 million on the balloon payment due next month, Arthur said. He sounded resigned, like a captain watching the water rise on the deck. I walked out of the office and into the lobby. The smell hit me now. A mix of old brass polish and damp plaster. Beneath that, something sweeter. Rot. The building was sick. I walked to the elevators. Out-of-order signs were taped to 2 of the 3 doors. I took the stairs, my hand trailing along the dusty banister. I needed to see the bones of the place. Richard said I was just a drafter. He forgot that to be a drafter, you have to understand how things stand up. On the 2nd floor, the hallway was dark. Light fixtures were missing bulbs. I opened the door to room 202. The bed was stripped, the mattress stained. This wasn't a hotel, it was a carcass. I moved higher, 3rd floor, 4th. It got worse. Unfinished drywall, exposed wiring. This was where the money was supposed to have gone? Millions of dollars in renovation loans, and the walls were still open? I reached the ballroom on the mezzanine. It was a vast, echoing space with a domed ceiling. A chandelier hung crookedly in the center, missing half its crystals. I stood in the center of the floor, closing my eyes. I could feel the weight of the building pressing down on me, the sheer mass of the debt. "Mrs. Sterling?" Arthur's voice echoed from the doorway. I turned. He looked pale. "There's a man here to see you," he said. "A guest?" "No, a city official." I followed him back down to the lobby. A man in a yellow hard hat and a high-visibility vest was standing by the reception desk, holding a clipboard. He didn't look like a bureaucrat, he looked like an executioner. "Monica Sterling?" he asked. He didn't wait for an answer. "I'm with the Department of Buildings. We received an anonymous tip about structural instability in the load-bearing columns on the east wing." "Anonymous?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "We need to do an immediate inspection," he said, clicking his pen. "If we find what was reported, I'm posting a condemn order. You'll have to vacate the premises immediately." He stepped forward, and I saw the logo on his clipboard. It wasn't just the city seal. He had a visitor badge from Sterling Capital clipped to his belt. He had come straight from Richard's office. I blocked the inspector's path. I was 5 feet 7 inches. He was over 6 feet. I didn't care. "You can't inspect without a warrant or probable cause," I said. My mind was racing, pulling up the building codes I had memorized years ago when Richard was first looking at commercial real estate. "Health and safety override," he droned, trying to step around me. "Section 14, paragraph B. Section 14 applies to residential occupancy," I snapped. "This is a commercial zone under renovation. You need a structural engineer's signed affidavit to enter a construction site without owner consent. Do you have one?" He paused. He blinked. He hadn't expected me to know the code. He expected the trophy wife to cry. "I can get one," he sneered. "Then go get it," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "But if you step foot past this desk before you do, I'll file a trespassing suit and a harassment claim against the city before you can get back to your car." He stared at me for a long moment, measuring me. Then he turned and walked out. "He'll be back," Arthur whispered. "I know," I said. "We have maybe 48 hours. I didn't go home. I couldn't. The locks would be changed by now. I walked back up the stairs to the penthouse suite. It was the only room that looked remotely finished, though the furniture was covered in plastic sheets. I pulled the plastic off a velvet armchair and sat down. My stomach growled. I hadn't eaten since yesterday. I opened my purse and counted the cash. $340. That was it. That was my net worth. I pulled out the blueprints I had found in Arthur's office. I spread them out on the floor. I needed to find a way to pass that inspection. I needed a loophole. I traced the lines of the east wing. The columns were old iron. Richard's tips said they were unstable. I looked at the stress load calculations in the margin. The numbers didn't add up. The load was calculated for concrete, not iron. It was a clerical error in the original filing, a typo. Richard knew about it. He had saved it for this exact moment. I grabbed a pencil and started doing the math. If I could reclassify the wing as historical preservation, the load requirements dropped by 20%. I could pass. I worked until the sun went down, the only light coming from the street lamps outside. Finally, I leaned back, my neck stiff. I had a plan, a fragile, desperate plan. I walked to the window to look at the city. Across the street, a large screen was mounted on the side of a building, playing the evening news. My breath hitched. It was Richard's face. He was standing on the steps of City Hall, microphones thrust in his face. The caption beneath him read, "Sterling Capital CEO announces divorce from troubled wife." I couldn't hear the audio, but I could read the chyron scrolling at the bottom. Cites mental instability and financial recklessness, establishing a charity fund for mental health in her honor. He wasn't just taking my money, he was taking my credibility. He was painting me as a crazy woman so that when I claimed fraud, no one would believe me. The next morning, I woke up stiff and cold in the armchair. The hunger was a sharp pain now, but the anger was sharper. It clarified things. I washed my face in the sink of the penthouse bathroom. The water was brown for the first 3 seconds. I fixed my hair, put on my lipstick, my armor, and went downstairs. Arthur was waiting. "The staff won't come back without payment, Mrs. Sterling." "Call them," I said. "Tell them they get cash tonight. Double time for the shift." "We don't have cash." I took off my watch. It was a vintage piece, platinum and diamond. Richard had given it to me for our 5th anniversary. "Sell this. It should bring $12,000 at a pawn shop. Use it to stock the bar and pay the servers." Arthur looked at the watch, then at me. He nodded, a newfound respect in his eyes. "And Arthur, reach out to the private list, the Thursday night group." Richard ran a high-stakes poker game every Thursday. Tech moguls, hedge fund managers, the occasional senator. They played for pots that could buy small islands. Richard wouldn't be hosting it tonight. He was too busy playing the grieving husband on TV. "Tell them the game is here tonight," I said. "Tell them the buy-in is $50,000, cash." Arthur hesitated. Richard won't like that. Richard isn't invited. By 8 o'clock, the library of the hotel was transformed. We used low lighting to hide the dust and the cracks in the plaster. The alcohol was top shelf, the only thing Richard hadn't skimped on. 4 men showed up. I knew them all. "Monica," said David, a software CEO who had always been too handsy. "Richard said you were indisposed." "Richard exaggerates." I smiled, pouring him a drink. "He's just jealous I got the hotel in the split. He always wanted this place." I played the hostess. I charmed. I bluffed. I watched them stack chips. The house took a 5% rake. By midnight, I would have $10,000 in clean cash, enough to keep the lights on for a week. While they played, I went into Arthur's office to clean. I needed to find the original deed. I was moving boxes of old invoices when I hit something hard behind the filing cabinet. A wall safe. It wasn't on the blueprints. It was old, hidden behind a false panel of wainscoting. I ran my fingers over the dial. It was a standard mechanical lock. I pressed my ear against the cold metal. I turned the dial slowly. Click. Right, left, right. I tried Richard's birthday, nothing. I tried our anniversary, nothing. I paused. Richard was a narcissist, but he was also a creature of habit. I tried the date of his first $1 million deal. Clunk. The handle turned. The heavy door swung open. I reached inside. It was empty. My heart sank. No cash. No gold bars. Wait. I felt around the back of the compartment. There was a piece of tape. I pulled it. Taped to the top of the inside of the safe was a small silver USB drive. I sat at Arthur's desk, the silver drive in my palm. It was warm from my grip. This wasn't a standard drive. It was heavy, encased in titanium. I plugged it into Arthur's computer. A window popped up instantly. Enter password. No hint. No forgot password link. Just a blinking cursor on a black background. I tried everything. The name of his first dog. The street he grew up on. The name of his mistress. Yes, I knew about her. Isabella. Access denied. After the third attempt, a red countdown timer appeared. Data wipe in 24 hours. I yanked the drive out. My heart hammered against my ribs. Richard wouldn't rigorous protect family photos. This was leverage. This was the reason he kept a failing hotel on his books for 2 years. I needed help. I needed someone who spoke a language I didn't. I went back out to the library. The game was breaking up. David was counting his winnings. "David," I said, walking him to the door, "you have a security consultant on your payroll, the one who fixed your problem with the SEC last year." David stiffened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I have a drive," I said, lowering my voice. "It's encrypted. If your guy can crack it, I'll forget I saw you moving chips to your partner under the table tonight." David stared at me. The lust in his eyes was gone, replaced by calculation. "His name is Silas. He's expensive." "He can bill me." I walked him out. The night air was cool. I felt a momentary surge of victory. I had cash in the safe, a lead on the drive, and the lights were still on. Then I saw the headlights. A convoy of black SUVs pulled up to the curb. Not police. Private security. Richard stepped out of the lead car. He was wearing a tuxedo, likely coming from a gala. He looked impeccable and furious. He wasn't alone. 2 men in suits stood behind him, holding architectural tubes. And behind them, a man I recognized from the society pages, a Chinese investor looking to buy distressed assets. Richard walked right up to me. He didn't look at the hotel. He looked at me. "You're making a scene, Monica," he said. "Hosting illegal gambling? Do you want to go to jail?" "It's a private party," I said, crossing my arms. "Invited guests only, and you're not on the list." "I'm here to save you," he said, loud enough for the investor to hear. "Mr. Chen is willing to take this burden off your hands. He's offering a generous buyout, enough to cover your debts and get you some help." He motioned to the men. They stepped forward, unrolling the tubes. They weren't just plans. They were demolition permits. "I'm not selling," I said. Mr. Chen stepped forward. He was an older man, elegant, with eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Sterling, the offer is $2 million above market value. The building is tired." "The building is a landmark," I said. "The building is a safety hazard," Richard cut in. "Monica, stop this. You're embarrassing yourself. You don't know the first thing about property management. You're a liability." The word hung in the air. Liability. I looked at Richard. He was so confident. He thought he held all the cards because he knew the deck, but he didn't know I had found the safe. "Actually, Mr. Chen," I said, turning to the investor, "I'm glad you're here. Richard forgot to mention the structural flaw in the West Foundation." Richard's eyes widened a fraction. "There is no flaw." "There is," I lied smoothly. "I was just reviewing the original geo surveys. The water table is 3 feet higher than disclosed. If you build the underground parking garage Richard promised you, the whole street will collapse." Mr. Chen frowned. He looked at Richard. "You said the geologicals were clean." "They are," Richard snapped, his composure cracking. "She's lying. She's trying to sabotage the deal." "Why would I sabotage a sale that would make me rich?" I asked innocently. "I'm just doing my due diligence. I wouldn't want you to inherit a sinking ship." Mr. Chen looked from me to Richard. He saw Richard sweat. He saw my calm. "I will have my own team review the surveys," Chen said. He bowed slightly to me, turned, and got back into his car. Richard watched the taillights fade. He turned back to me, his face twisted in a mask of pure hate. "You have no idea what you just did," he hissed. "You think this is a game? You're playing with people who don't sue, Monica. They remove obstacles." "Get off my property, Richard," I said, "or I'll call the police and tell them you're trespassing." He laughed, a cold, dry sound. "Enjoy the ruin, Monica. It suits you." He got in his car and drove off. I stood there, my knees shaking. I had bought time, but I had made enemies. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I had bought a burner with the cash from the poker game. Unknown number. "Hello?" "It's Silas," a distorted voice said. "David gave me the drive. I bypassed the timer." "What's on it?" There was a long pause. I could hear keyboard clacking in the background. "Mrs. Sterling," Silas said, his voice dropping. "This isn't just accounting. This is a laundry log. There are transfers here going to shell companies in the Caymans, Panama, and, God, there are payments to federal judges." "How much? In total? Over 5 years?" Silas let out a low whistle. $200 million. And according to the metadata, every single transaction was authorized from an IP address inside that hotel. $200 million. The number didn't feel real. It felt like a coordinate on a map I wasn't supposed to see. I sat in the dim light of the penthouse, the laptop screen casting a blue pallor over my hands. Silas had decrypted the logs, but the interpretation was all mine. I scrolled through the columns. Richard wasn't just laundering money. He was running a high-speed spin cycle for a cartel that operated out of the port of Miami, and he was doing it badly. I spotted the inefficiencies immediately. Redundant transfers. High fees paid to shell companies that he likely owned himself to skim off the top. He was stealing from thieves. That was the arrogance of Richard Sterling. He thought he was smarter than the people who paid him. If I went to the police now, the hotel would be seized as evidence. I would be penniless, homeless, and possibly indicted as an accomplice since my name was on the deed. The only way out was through. I had to become the thing Richard said I couldn't be, a player. A heavy pounding on the front doors downstairs echoed up the elevator shaft. It was 3 a.m. I checked the security feed on my phone. A single black sedan was parked in the fire lane. A man stood at the door. He wasn't security. He wasn't police. He wore a linen suit that cost more than my car, and he stood with the unnatural stillness of a predator, waiting for movement. I went down. I didn't turn on the lobby lights. I walked to the glass doors and unlocked them. "We're closed," I said, blocking the entrance. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were flat, dead things. "Mrs. Sterling, my employer would like to discuss the structural integrity of his investment." "Mr. Chen?" I asked, remembering the man from earlier. "Mr. Chen is a middleman," he said softly. "I work for the source. My name is Nikolai. You have something that belongs to us." He knew about the drive, or at least he knew Richard had lost control of the narrative. "I have a hotel to run, Nikolai. Unless you're checking in, you can leave." He stepped closer. I could smell his cologne, sandalwood, and gun oil. "Richard says you are unstable. He says you are holding on to the property out of spite. We don't like spite. It attracts attention." "Richard says a lot of things," I replied, keeping my voice level despite the terror clawing at my throat. "Did he tell you he's skimming 4% off your transaction fees through a shell company in Delaware?" Nikolai stopped. The smile vanished. "Excuse me?" "I'm an accountant, Nikolai. Or I was before I was a wife. I looked at the books. Richard is charging you 12% to wash your laundry. The market rate is 8%, and he's pocketing the difference." I saw the doubt flicker in his eyes. It was a tiny crack, but I could work with cracks. "If you want to kill me, go ahead," I said, stepping back to let the door close between us. "But then you'll never see the ledger that proves it, and Richard will keep stealing from you until the feds shut him down." Nikolai placed a hand on the glass. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. "Tomorrow," he said, "noon. If you can't prove it, Mrs. Sterling, I will burn this building down with you inside it." I spent the morning preparing a presentation. It was absurd. I was preparing a pitch deck for a cartel enforcer as if I were trying to secure a seed round for a tech startup. I printed the spreadsheets, highlighted the skimming in red, and bound them in the only folders I could find, old hotel marketing kits with gold foil logos. Nikolai arrived at 11:55. He didn't come alone. He brought a forensic accountant of his own, a small, nervous man with thick glasses who looked like he should be doing taxes for a bakery. We sat in the library. I poured coffee. I laid out the documents. "Here," I said, pointing to column D. "Richard routes the funds through Sterling Consulting before they hit the offshore accounts. He categorizes it as a consultation fee. But look at the timestamps. The money sits there for 48 hours. He's using the float to play the overnight markets, keeping the gains, and then charging you a fee on the principal." The nervous accountant adjusted his glasses, tracing the lines with a trembling finger. He looked up at Nikolai and nodded once. Nikolai leaned back in the velvet chair. The leather creaked. "He has been doing this for 2 years. 3, I corrected. "And as of last month, he started increasing the fee. He thinks you won't notice because the volume is so high." Nikolai was silent for a long time. He took a sip of the coffee. "You are not unstable, Mrs. Sterling." "No, I'm divorced. It's similar, but the motivation is different." "What do you want?" "I want the contract," I said. The words tasted like ash, but I forced them out. "I keep the hotel. I take over the processing. I charge you 8%, flat. No skimming, no games. Pure efficiency." Nikolai studied me. "You have the infrastructure?" "I have the building. I have the servers. And unlike Richard, I have nothing else to lose." He stood up. He didn't shake my hand. "We will test you. 1 transfer. Small. 500,000. If it clears in 24 hours, we talk about the rest." He left. I collapsed into the chair, my hands shaking so hard I spilled the coffee. I had done it. I had just entered into a partnership with organized crime to save my inheritance. I pulled out my phone to check the hotel's operating account, hoping the poker money had cleared so I could pay the electric bill. The screen flashed red. Account frozen. I tapped the notification. It wasn't a bank error, it was a court order. Plaintiff, Richard Sterling. Reason, emergency injunction for dissipation of marital assets. My phone rang. It was Arthur calling from his cell. Mrs. Sterling, he sounded breathless. The police are here. They have a restraining order. Richard is claiming you threatened him. You're barred from coming within 500 feet of the hotel. I stood on the sidewalk across the street from my own hotel, watching the police cruiser idle in the loading zone. It was a masterpiece of legal maneuvering. Richard knew he couldn't get me out with a foreclosure yet, so he used a restraining order to physically bar me from the premises. If I couldn't enter, I couldn't run the business. If I couldn't run the business, it would fail, and he would swoop in as the savior appointed by the court. I pulled my coat tighter. It was starting to rain. I had the test transfer from Nikolai coming in 4 hours. If I couldn't access the server in the basement, the transfer would fail. If it failed, Nikolai would burn the place down. I needed a proxy. I called Arthur. He picked up on the first ring. They're watching the lobby, he whispered. I know. Arthur, listen to me. I need you to go to the server room. Can you do that? I suppose, but the police are asking for the manager. Tell them you're the janitor. Arthur, this is life or death. Go to the server room. There is a terminal in the back. I'm going to talk you through a rerouting protocol. Mrs. Sterling, I can't even program the microwave in the break room. You don't need to understand it. You just need to type what I say, please. I waited, listening to his breathing and the squeak of his shoes. 10 minutes passed. The rain soaked through my coat. Finally, he spoke. I'm there. Okay, type sudo space admin space dash X. I guided him through the command line, visualizing the screen in my mind. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Every hesitation from Arthur felt like a heart attack. It says, transfer complete, Arthur said finally. I sagged against a lamppost. Thank you, Arthur. Now wipe the screen and get out of there. I hung up. The test was done. I had proved I could work. Now I had to get back in. I walked to a nearby cafe to get out of the rain and think. I ordered a tea I couldn't afford and opened my laptop. I needed a lawyer, not one of Richard's country club friends. I needed a shark who swam in dirty water. A man in a trench coat walked into the cafe. He scanned the room, spotted me, and walked over. He dropped a thick envelope on the table. Monica Sterling? Yes. You've been served. He turned and left. I opened the envelope. It wasn't just the restraining order. It was a lawsuit. Sterling versus Sterling. He was suing me for gross mismanagement and corporate sabotage. He was petitioning the court for an emergency-appointed receiver to take control of the hotel immediately. The hearing was in 48 hours. The law office of Marcus Thorne was located above a dry cleaner in Queens. The waiting room smelled of chemicals and old coffee. Marcus himself looked like he had slept in his suit. He was young, maybe 30, with ink stains on his fingers and a hunger in his eyes that matched my own. Let me get this straight, Marcus said, flipping through the paperwork I had brought. Your husband, who is worth nearly $1 billion, is suing you for mismanaging a hotel that has been closed for 2 years. He's trying to force a sale, I said. He needs the building back. Why? Sentimental value, I lied. I couldn't tell him about the money laundering. Not yet. Marcus laughed. It was a sharp, barking sound. Rich guys don't have sentiment, Mrs. Sterling. They have agendas. But I don't care about the why. I care about the retainer, which I see you don't have. I can give you 5% of the hotel when we win, I said. 0% of 0 is 0. I need cash. I have 5,000, I said, placing the last of the poker money on the desk. It's all I have, but if you take this case, you get to beat Richard Sterling. I looked you up, Marcus. You used to work for his firm. He fired you for ethical incompatibility. Marcus stopped. He looked at the money, then at me. His jaw tightened. He framed me, Marcus said quietly. He needed a scapegoat for a botched merger. I know, so help me bury him. Marcus picked up the cash. We file a counter motion. We argue that the restraining order is a tactical litigation tool used to intentionally sabotage the asset. We ask for an emergency stay, but we need proof that he's acting in bad faith. I have emails, I said, from his assistant, confirming he knew about the structural issues before he gave me the deed. We worked through the night. Marcus was brilliant. He saw angles I had missed. We drafted a motion that was a work of art. By dawn, we were ready. I'll file this at the clerk's office as soon as they open, Marcus said, rubbing his eyes. Go get some sleep, Monica. We might actually have a shot. I left his office feeling a glimmer of hope. I took a cab back to the city, intending to sleep in my car since I couldn't go to the hotel. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. He took the money. Then a photo. It was grainy, taken from a distance. It showed Marcus standing in an alleyway shaking hands with Richard's head of security. The betrayal tasted metallic. Marcus hadn't just taken my $5,000. He had sold me out to Richard for likely 10 times that amount. He wasn't going to file the motion. He was going to let the deadline pass, and Richard would win by default. I sat in my car staring at the photo. I could cry or I could use it. I texted Marcus. I found something else. A hidden account Richard used to buy the property next door to the hotel. The zoning documents are in the safe. I'm bringing them to you. It was a lie. There was no property next door. There were no zoning documents. I waited. 3 minutes later, Marcus replied, "Great. Bring it over. I haven't filed yet." He was stalling. He was relaying the information to Richard right now. Richard would panic. If he thought I had proof he was expanding the laundromat, he would try to cover his tracks. I drove to the public library and used a computer to monitor the county clerk's real estate feed. At 2 o'clock, a new filing appeared. Sterling Capital had just placed an emergency cash bid on the derelict warehouse adjacent to the Gilded Cage. He was buying it sight unseen, probably thinking I had evidence of something buried there, or that he needed to control the perimeter before I exposed him. He had just spent $3 million on a building that was slated for demolition by the city next month. He overextended. I picked up my phone and called the tip line of the City Chronicle. "I have a story," I said. "Richard Sterling is buying up condemned properties to drive out local businesses, and he's suing his ex-wife to keep her quiet." The story broke online at 5 o'clock. Billionaire bully versus the abandoned wife. The internet did what the internet does. They picked a side. They didn't care about the legalities. They cared about the narrative. By 6 o'clock, #StandWithMonica was trending locally. But visibility is a double-edged sword. My phone started blowing up. Not with support, but with hate. Richard's PR team was working overtime. Bots, trolls. They released my personal email. They released my phone number. Then they released my location. "She's sleeping in her car on 5th and Main." One tweet read, "Go tell her what you think of gold diggers." I looked out the window. 3 teenagers were already walking toward my car, phones out recording. I started the engine and peeled away before they could surround me. I couldn't stay on the streets. I was exposed. I had one card left to play, the public eye. I drove straight to the hotel. The police cruiser was still there, but now, so were 2 news vans. The media had smelled blood. I got out of the car. The officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, you are in violation of—" "Am I?" I shouted, turning to face the cameras. "I'm standing on the public sidewalk. I'm watching my husband steal my business." The cameras swiveled toward me. The lights were blinding. I looked straight into the lens. "Richard Sterling wants this hotel," I said, my voice shaking just enough to look vulnerable. "He wants to tear it down because he hates that I'm building something. Well, I'm open for business. The Gilded Cage is open. If you want to see the truth, book a room." It was a pivot, a rebranding, the rebel luxury. The response was instant. My reservation system, which I could access from my phone, pinged. 1 booking, then 3, then 10. People wanted to be part of the drama. They wanted to stay in the hotel that the billionaire hated. The police officer looked at the cameras, then at me. He wasn't going to arrest a crying woman on live TV. He stepped back. I walked past him. I walked past the "Do Not Enter" sign. I walked into my lobby. Arthur was there, staring at me wide-eyed. "We have guests coming, Arthur," I said, throwing my coat on the desk. "Get the staff back. Tell them the tips will be legendary." By midnight, we had 50% occupancy. The hotel was alive. The guests didn't care about the dust. They thought it was shabby chic. They posted photos of the unfinished walls on Instagram. We were a viral sensation. I was in the office watching the revenue climb when the fire alarm screamed. It wasn't a drill. "Fire in the lobby!" someone screamed. I ran out. Smoke was billowing from the heavy velvet drapes near the entrance. Guests were screaming, running for the doors. I grabbed a fire extinguisher. Arthur grabbed another. We sprayed the drapes, choking on the acrid smoke. The fire was small, contained to the fabric, but the panic was real. The sprinklers kicked on, drenching everything. The guests fled into the night. The viral moment was over. Now it was a disaster scene. The fire department left an hour later. The lobby was a soaked, charred mess. The guests were gone, refunded and relocated to other hotels. The buzz online had turned from support to suspicion. Safety hazard, they typed. Death trap. I stood in the center of the ruined lobby, water dripping from my hair. Richard had escalated. He didn't care about the restraining order anymore. He was willing to kill people. A firefighter, a heavy-set captain with soot on his face, walked over to me. He was holding a plastic evidence bag. "Mrs. Sterling," he said grimly, "we found the source." Inside the bag was a metal canister. It was twisted from the heat, but the label was partially visible. "It's an industrial accelerant," the captain said. "Not something you buy at a hardware store. This is used for controlled demolitions." I looked closer at the canister. There was a serial number stamped on the bottom rim. "Can you trace it?" I asked. "We will," he said. "But usually this stuff is tracked by batch. Whoever bought this had to sign for it." He walked away to file his report. I didn't wait for the police to do their job. I pulled out my phone and zoomed in on the photo of the canister I had just taken. I ran the batch number through a construction supply database I still had access to from my days at Sterling Capital. Batch 492-2-X. Sold to Vortex Holdings, LLC. I knew that name. It wasn't Richard's company. It wasn't one of his usual shells. Vortex Holdings was the company registered to investigate the environmental impact of the new city park, a company that was supposedly independent. And the signatory on the receipt? It wasn't Richard. It was Isabella, his mistress, the woman he had left me for. Richard hadn't sent his security team to set the fire. He had sent his fiancée. He was keeping his hands clean, letting her do the dirty work. He was using her, just like he had used me. I looked at the blackened walls of my hotel. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was clear. "Arthur," I said, my voice cutting through the sound of dripping water. "Don't clean this up. Leave it." "Leave it?" "Yes, we're not a hotel anymore. We're a crime scene, and I'm about to invite the lead suspect for a tour." I stared at the digital receipt on my phone screen until the pixels started to blur. Isabella Vance. The signature was loopy, decorative, the kind of handwriting that practiced its future last name in the margins of notebooks. She had signed for the accelerant. She had signed the lease for Vortex Holdings. It was classic Richard. He didn't just discard people. He composted them. He layered them over his liabilities so that when the rot finally set in, it was their names on the decomposition, not his. He had done it to me with the hotel deed. Now he was doing it to Isabella with the arson materials. The realization hit me with the cold clarity of ice water. Isabella wasn't his partner. She was his parachute. When this inevitable crash happened, and Richard always crashed eventually, he would pull the cord. She would take the fall for the rogue shell company that burned down his ex-wife's property, and he would float away, grieving and innocent. I looked around my blackened lobby. The smell of wet char was overpowering, coating the back of my throat with the taste of ash. I wasn't fighting a rival anymore. I was fighting a man who had strapped a bomb to a 24-year-old girl's chest and told her it was a diamond necklace. "Arthur," I said, turning to him. He was sweeping up shattered glass, his movements slow and rhythmic. "Do we still have the guest list from the engagement party Richard threw here last year?" "I believe so, Mrs. Sterling. In the archives." "Find it. I need Isabella's contact info. Not the one she gives the press, the real one." 10 minutes later, I was dialing. It went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I sent a text. A single image. The receipt with her signature next to the words, "Industrial Incendiary Compound." I added a caption. "He told you it was for the fireplace in the Aspen house, didn't he?" The response came 3 minutes later. 3 ellipsis dots bouncing, disappearing, bouncing again. "Meet me," she wrote. She chose a tea room in the Upper East Side, a place where the silence was heavy and the china was bone thin. Isabella was sitting in a corner booth, wearing oversized sunglasses and a trench coat that looked like it was trying to swallow her whole. I slid into the seat opposite her. She didn't take off the glasses. "You're trying to frame me," she hissed. Her voice was brittle, shaking. "Richard said you would try something like this. He said you're obsessive." "I don't have to frame you, Isabella. You signed the paperwork. You bought the fuel that burned my hotel. That's 10 years in federal prison. 15 if they tack on the endangerment charge." I placed a folder on the table. It wasn't legal threats. It was a timeline. "Look at the dates," I said, pouring myself a cup of Earl Grey. The steam rose, smelling of bergamot. 3 years ago, he made me sign the incorporation papers for a firm called Blue Horizon. 6 months later, that firm was sued for dumping toxic waste. My name was on the settlement. He told me it was a clerical error. Isabella looked at the folder. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. "He told me Vortex was an investment vehicle for our future," she whispered. "He said he couldn't put it in his name because of the divorce proceedings." "He's right. He couldn't. Because if he did, he couldn't blame you when the building burned down." She pulled off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red-rimmed, terrified. She wasn't the shark I thought she was. She was just the bait. "He's moving money tonight," she said, her voice barely audible. "He's emptying the Cayman accounts. He says we're leaving for non-extradition countries on Friday." "He's leaving," I corrected. "You're staying. You're the one with the warrant waiting, Isabella." Before she could answer, the bell above the door chimed aggressively. The air in the room shifted. Richard strode in. He wasn't wearing his usual suit. He looked disheveled, frantic. He spotted us immediately. "Isabella!" he roared. The conversation in the tea room died instantly. Heads turned. He marched over and grabbed her arm, hauling her up. "I told you not to talk to her. I told you she's dangerous." "Let go of her, Richard," I said, not standing up. "You're making a scene." "You think I care about a scene?" He loomed over me, his face purple with rage. "You're trying to poison everything I have. You're pathetic, Monica. You're a leech." He dragged Isabella toward the door. She looked back at me, her eyes wide, pleading. She looked like a woman realizing the life raft she was on was actually an anchor. I didn't chase them. I waited. 2 hours later, my burner phone buzzed. It was Isabella. He locked me in the bedroom. He's shredding documents in the study. He has a flight booked for 1. Just him. Zurich. Tonight. I texted back, "Can you get out?" "Window," she replied. "I have the ledger, the real one. The physical book he keeps in the safe behind the Matisse. Bring it to the hotel. We end this tonight." I called Nikolai. The line clicked open. "The package is ready," I said. "Richard is trying to run. He'll be at the hotel in 1 hour." "Why the hotel?" Nikolai asked. His voice was smooth, unbothered. "Because I'm going to offer him the one thing he can't resist. A victory." I sent a message to Richard's personal number. "I surrender. I can't do the repairs. The fire broke me. I'll sign the deed over to you tonight. Just call off the lawsuits. Meet me in the lobby. Alone." It was the bait he needed. His ego wouldn't let him ignore it. He wanted to see me broken. He wanted to stand in my ashes and sign his name. I set the stage. I had Arthur place a single table in the center of the charred lobby. A single lamp powered by an extension cord. One chair for me. One for him. The deed sat in the center, a white rectangle against the black soot. At 9 o'clock, the doors opened. Richard walked in, but he wasn't alone. He had brought his personal counsel, a man named Stone who looked like a tombstone in a suit, and behind them 2 uniformed police officers. "Mrs. Sterling," Richard said, his voice echoing in the cavernous, burnt space, "I'm glad you finally saw reason, but I'm afraid the deal has changed. You're not just signing over the hotel." He gestured to the officers. "You're also confessing to the arson," he smiled, "for the insurance money." "Officer, arrest her." The officers stepped forward, handcuffs glinting in the harsh light of the lamp. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This wasn't the plan. Richard had brought real police. He had outmaneuvered me. "You can't be serious," I said, standing up. "You know I didn't set that fire." "I know you're desperate," Richard said, walking to the table. He picked up the deed, inspecting it. "Desperate people do desperate things, like burning down their own failures. Sign the confession, Monica, and maybe I'll ask the judge for leniency." He leaned in, his face inches from mine. I could smell the scotch on his breath. "You were never a player, Monica. You were just the help." "And the money?" I asked, my voice trembling. "The $200 million you washed through this place? Does that go in the confession too?" Richard laughed. He looked at the officers, then back to me. He felt safe. These were his town, his cops. "There is no money," he whispered, low enough that only I could hear, "because by tomorrow, this building will be a parking lot, and the servers will be landfill. No evidence, no crime, just you in a cell, wondering where you went wrong." He pulled a pen from his pocket. "Sign." I looked past him, into the shadows of the mezzanine. "Did you get that?" I asked. Richard frowned. "Who are you talking to?" "The people you actually work for," I said. The shadows moved. From the darkened stairwell, Nikolai stepped out. But he wasn't wearing his linen suit. He was wearing a tactical vest with federal insignia. And behind him, a dozen agents swarmed from the kitchen, the basement, the upper floors. "Richard Sterling," Nikolai said, his voice projecting clearly. "I'm Special Agent Miller. You're under arrest for money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit arson." Richard dropped the pen. He spun around to his officers, but they were already on the ground, zip-tied by the agents who had come up behind them. They weren't real cops. They were private security in costumes. Another fraud. "This is entrapment," Richard screamed, backing away. "She set me up. She's the owner. It's her hotel." "We know," Nikolai said, walking into the light. He placed a hand on the table next to the deed. "She's been a cooperating witness for the last 72 hours, and thanks to the ledger your fiancé just handed us outside, we have everything." The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut is a specific, final sound. It's the sound of a metal door slamming on a life. Richard was on his knees in the soot. His suit was ruined. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, uncomprehending. He couldn't process it. He couldn't process that the variables had changed. "Monica," he rasped. "Monica, tell them. Tell them we can work this out. I can pay. I have accounts they don't know about." "I know Richard," I said, looking down at him. "Isabella showed me. We gave those to the IRS an hour ago." They hauled him up. As they dragged him toward the doors, he twisted back to look at me. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was confusion. "Why?" he shouted. "I gave you everything. I made you." I walked over to him. I signaled the agents to pause. I wanted him to hear this. I wanted it to be the last thing he remembered before the cell door closed. I leaned in close, smelling the sweat and the fear. "You said I was nothing special," I whispered. "You were right. I'm just a drafter. I draw lines, and you just crossed the last one." I nodded to the agents. They pushed him out into the night, into the flashing lights of the real police cruisers waiting outside. I stood alone in the lobby. It was ruined, it was burned, it was empty, and it was entirely mine. Isabella walked in from the street, wrapped in a blanket an agent had given her. She looked at me, then at the spot where Richard had been kneeling. "Is it over?" she asked. "No," I said, picking up the deed from the table. "The demolition starts tomorrow, but this time we're building something that actually stands up." 6 months later, the champagne flute was cold in my hand. The air smelled of fresh lilies and expensive perfume. The Gilded Cage was gone. In its place stood the sterling, not named after him, named after the quality of the silver. Pure, tested. The grand opening was chaos in the best way. The paparazzi who had once hunted me were now fighting for a photo of the architecture. The lobby was no longer dark velvet and shadows. It was glass, light, and steel, transparent. I stood on the mezzanine, watching the crowd. Isabella was down there, managing the VIP list. She was good at it, efficient, ruthless. We made a good team. Arthur appeared at my elbow, holding a silver tray. On it was a single letter. No stamp, just my name in block letters. "It came from the correctional facility," Arthur said quietly. "Do you want to read it?" I looked at the envelope. I knew what was inside. Bargaining, threats, or maybe just a desperate attempt to exert control one last time, to plant a seed of doubt. I took the letter. I felt the weight of it, the weight of the past. I walked over to the new fireplace, a gas flame dancing behind a sheet of safety glass. "No," I said. I tossed the envelope into the fire. It sat for a moment on the ceramic logs, resisting, and then the edges curled. The paper blackened. The words inside, whatever they were, turned to smoke. I didn't watch it burn. I turned my back to the fire and looked out at the party. "Arthur," I said, smiling, "open the ballroom. I think it's time we started the real game." They tell women that silence is a virtue, that keeping the peace is our primary function, but peace is just a pretty word for submission. Richard wanted a silent partner. He wanted a ghost. He didn't realize that ghosts are the ones who haunt you. I didn't win because I was stronger. I didn't win because I was richer. I won because I was willing to let the whole thing burn down just to see who would run from the fire. I looked at the ashes and saw a foundation. So tell me, when they hand you the match, will you blow it out or will you drop it? If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.